All right, hello everyone. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I wanted to start out with a little quiz for everyone. I'm gonna read a product's ingredients, and we'll see if anyone can figure out what that product is. Okay, so you ready? It's going to take a while, so just bear with me. Enriched bleached flour, water, palm and or soybean oil, high fructose corn syrup, salt, maltodextrin, apple puree, cornstarch, dextrose, modified cornstarch, dry yeast, hydrogenated palm oil, salt, whey, strawberry puree, baking powder. I'm about halfway through. Corn syrup solids, citric acid, mono and diglycerides, sodium citrate, egg yolk, potassium sorbate, sodium benzoate, TBHQ, citric acid, xanthan gum, natural and artificial flavor, polysorbate 60, guar gum, locust bean gum, red 40, blue 1, sucralose. Baby food, oh my gosh. Thankfully it's not, no. No. Cereal bars, close. Someone said chips. Not, Pop-Tarts is close. Here, I'll put the, did you see the slide before? No. That's really, no one's ever gotten that. Toaster strudel. Yeah. Here are the ingredients, and here's, you can see all the ingredients. The interesting thing is a strawberry toaster strudel. And the interesting thing about this is you look at this product and you wonder, well, is there any real food in here? And you look at the ingredients, and you have to look pretty closely at it, and you can kind of see, you know, and by food I mean whole food. Apple puree, that's kind of a food, you know, it depends on how they make it. Then there's strawberry puree, so that's where they're obviously getting the strawberries from. Egg yolk, that's a food. But after that, that's about it. There's not much else in there that can be really considered food. But if you look at the front of the package, you get a whole different story, right? You see a ripe strawberry in there. And you wonder, I mean, I wonder how many strawberries you would have to eat, or how many toaster strudels you would have to eat to equal one strawberry. My guess is about like 29, maybe. And then you see in big letters, right? It's one of the first things that you would see if you looked at this package. Made with more fruit. But here's the interesting thing about that. If you go back to the other ingredient list, the fruit, you see, is under the category, and the fruit is apple puree and strawberry puree. Contains 2% or less of the following. So if it contains more fruit, it's at 2% now, including all these other ingredients. What was it at before? You know, 0.5%, less than 1% of fruit. So it's very misleading, and this is just one example of the types of things that processed food makers do to paint a more glowing and very misleading picture of what their products actually are. And it would be a very different story if there had to be real truth in labeling, and food told the story of what really, this is a bit maybe what it would look like if you told what was really behind that packaging. So, 3 kinds of sugar with oil. So unfortunately, there are lots of toaster strudel type products in the grocery store. I mean, I just picked that one in particular because I think the name toaster strudel is completely ridiculous. The average supermarket is filled with 43,000 different items. And just to give a perspective on over time, in 1970, the average grocery store had about 8,000 items. So there's been this incredible supersizing of our food choices and of the supermarket. And you have to wonder, you have to ask the question, are our lives any better because of this? The fact that we now have, 40,000 or so different additional types of products. Does this make our lives any better? Does it make our grocery shopping any easier? I would argue that it actually makes it harder. So you walk down the supermarket and these large canyons of an aisle, and it's just crowded with an overwhelming number of products, and many of which are deeply confusing to people, to supermarket shoppers. So so you have to wonder, what is all this stuff that we're eating? And what's really in it? And that's one of the things that I want to talk about today, and it's one of the things that prompted me to want to write my book. But first, I think we have to ask, how did we get here? One of the first places that it started was a town called Battle Creek, Michigan. And here was a guy, as is so often the case with innovation, it's someone who starts out with good intentions. This was a guy, John Harvey Kellogg. He started a place that now would be considered kind of like a yoga retreat spa facility. And lots of celebrities came there, and he treated people with all kinds of diseases. It became very famous at the time. This is around the late 19th century, turn of the 20th century. It was called the Sanatorium. And one of the things, he had lots of ideas about health, many of which were completely nutty and wrong, but one of the things he was right about was that people needed more fiber in their diets. At the time, especially the upper classes, people were eating a lot of meats throughout the day, including for breakfast. And this was causing all kinds of health problems. So he was vegetarian, he was a Seventh-day Adventist, and he created what became the first breakfast cereal. He wanted people, after they left the sanitarium, to be able to go home and have a product, at least for breakfast, that was as healthy as what they were eating when they were staying with him. So he experimented with wheat flakes, and he baked them and soaked them and rolled them out, and came up with a product that he called granose. And it was very healthy. It was made with whole wheat flakes. He didn't add much to it. It probably tasted like cardboard, but very healthy. And eventually, he and his brother joined him in this endeavor, his younger brother. And eventually, they started experimenting with the product, made it taste a little better, and started using corn, and it became corn flakes. So really one of the first enduring convenience foods that was created around the turn of the 20th century. But one of the problems with cornflakes, once it started to gain in popularity and lots of people started buying it, and they started distributing it beyond just Battle Creek, and they started distributing it throughout the Midwest to lots of different grocery stores, there was a problem. Because suddenly you weren't getting a fresh product that had come right off the assembly line, which was, a very small assembly line at the time. But, and you would open the box, and there would be this kind of awful smell, this rancid smell. And what was happening was that the Kellogg brothers were using the whole corn kernel to make these corn flakes. So they were relatively healthy. It was a whole grain cereal. But as a result, because there was a certain shelf life needed, it would be sitting around for weeks or even months. The oil in the corn would start to turn and go rancid. So what the Kellogg brothers did, or at the time it was just his brother Will Keith Kellogg, who went on to run the Kellogg Company for many years. What he did was a very interesting and revealing example of one of the inherent trade-offs in processed food. He ended up taking away the germ and the bran of the corn and using just the starchy middle, what he called the sweetheart of the corn. He used this, in marketing. He decided he was going to use this starchy, the switch to just the starchy part of the corn as a marketing tool, and it was very, very effective. But what they didn't, and what they probably didn't know at the time, because not much was known about vitamins at that time, around 1907, they ended up basically taking away all the nutrition that would have been in cornflakes. All the vitamins, the fiber, all the good stuff that would have been in cornflakes was removed in order to make way for a longer shelf life. So just a very revealing example of what happens when you try to create convenience foods and processed foods. And this was something that happened very early on. another early example of processed food was processed cheese. In 1915, this was a man named James Kraft. He was a Canadian guy. He was a cheese seller in Chicago, which meant he would go around to all these cheese markets and collect cheese with his horse and buggy early in the morning and deliver it to all these grocery stores. At the time, there was, just mom and pop grocery stores. There was no Safeway, so it was very inefficient distribution. And so he noticed very quickly that there were these inefficiencies with cheese. There was very little refrigeration at the time, even at grocery stores, and the cheese would there was these big wheels of cheese, which you can still sometimes find in like Whole Foods. They'll have them on display. And people would, when they buy cheese, the grocers would cut off a wedge of the cheese. So overnight, there was no packaging, and the cheese would harden, and then the grocer would have to cut it off the next morning. So they were wasting a lot of cheese. And then in the summer months, it was the cheese would start to oil and go bad. And he thought, gosh, wouldn't it be great if we could make a cheese, if there was some way to make cheese last forever, that wouldn't go bad. So he experimented with this. He heated a bunch of shredded cheese for a certain period of time at a certain temperature, stirring it constantly, and came up with what we now know today as processed cheese. And originally, first it was sold in these tins, these 3-ounce tins, and in his patent that he filed in 1915, he called it permanently keeping and sterilized. And this was actually a good thing. People, today we look at that and we think, well, who wants sterilized cheese? But at the time, there wasn't a lot of consistency in food. Sometimes when you bought cheese, it had like a certain crunchy taste to it. Sometimes it was creamy. You didn't know how old it was, or if there just wasn't a lot of standardization of food. So people loved this, the fact that they could buy one of these Kraft tins, keep it in their pantry for months and months and months, if not years, and it would taste the same every time. It was in an era when this technological modernity was embraced at the time. Factories were something that was seen as a positive thing. But there was a trade-off here. So you had this extra shelf life. The cheese would last forever. But what Kraft probably also didn't realize at the time is that processed cheese, actually has twice the sodium of natural cheese or regular cheese. So you're getting, and some of that is not necessarily, some of it's coming from the salt that's being added to make it taste better because you've killed all the flavor in the cheese, and some of it's coming from the sodium additives, sodium citrate, and I forget the one other. Anyway, there's a couple sodium-based additives in there that don't contribute any taste, don't help it taste better, but are just in there for food processing purposes as emulsifiers, and they contribute sodium. And in case you're wondering, how long Kraft Singles will last, I just started this experiment when I first started writing about food. It was about 10 years ago now. I started wondering about expiration dates on packages, and I thought, what would happen if these bars or this cereal or this package of processed meat, what happens after the expiration date? And I started collecting a lot of them in my office. Actually, at the time, it was in my apartment in New York City. And one of the things I collected were Kraft Singles. And so here are my Kraft Singles at age 4. After 4 years, there's no mold whatsoever. If you can see, there's like little crystals on them, and those are apparently lactose crystallizing, just the lactose that's in cheese. They've basically turned to plastic. It's hard. It resembles. It's still the very bright orange color, and you wouldn't want to eat it, but there's no mold. Basically, Kraft Singles will never mold, and they're not actually cheese. If you actually look on the package of Kraft Singles, it'll say pasteurized prepared cheese product. Well, for a while, it was actually called pasteurized prepared cheese food, and then in 2003, Kraft added another ingredient, milk protein concentrate, that actually required it by the FDA. They were required to change it from pasteurized prepared cheese food to pasteurized prepared cheese product. So effectively downgrading it from a food to a product, making it even less cheese. But these were all things that at the time, when they were developed, made people's lives a little bit more convenient, and they were heralded. And here's one of my favorites. The way food manufacturers would tout the technology in their food. This was puffed rice, which was one of the early breakfast cereals as well. Shot from guns, and it's actually a gun puffing machine that was created. The first iteration of it was actually a cannon from the Civil War, and it's still gun puffers are still used in cereal manufacturing, but no cereal manufacturer would ever think to put this on the cover, right? I mean, they put fields of wheat and corn and farmers and barns and all these sort of agrarian and pastoral images because they want to highlight the connection it has to the farm, which is a very tenuous connection, but they would never think to put gun puffers on the front of a package. So, and at one point in time, one of the other early breakfast cereals, CW Post's Grape Nuts, had a little a message on the packaging that said, "Factory always open to visitors," which I thought was fascinating because when I was doing my research and trying to go into some of these cereal factories, none of the 4 big cereal manufacturers, nobody would let me inside their cereal factories to see how cereal is actually made. So that's been a completely transformed policy by the cereal makers. So, but these were early days for the food industry. Things didn't really start to ramp up until after World War II, when the food manufacturers used their preserving and packaging technologies that they'd used to create war rations. When they started to use those in the public market, they really ramped up their production and their selling techniques. And that's when they started a concerted effort to try and get American housewives, because at the time it was women, housewives that were doing all the food preparation and cooking. A concerted effort to try and get them to just stop cooking so much and to use processed products and use the food manufacturers as to rely on them for doing some of their cooking, which I'm sure housewives at the time welcomed. And here's a I love old ads because they're just this wonderful time capsule view into the past. So this, if I can get it to play, let me see. Okay. So this is a Swanson TV dinner ad from 1955.
Wow. Say, you gals think you're lucky you can get Swanson TV turkey dinners, but I say Swanson TV turkey dinners are a bigger break for husbands. Now, you take me. I can be early, I can be late, I can bring pals to dinner anytime I please, and get this, my wife never panics. She just takes Swanson TV turkey dinners from the freezing compartment of our refrigerator when I'm a little off schedule.
Oh, and right you are, Jack. And that is because Mary Lou knows that she can have a swell dinner ready in just 25 minutes.
Right.
And talk about easy. Well, she just pops Swanson TV turkey dinners in a hot oven. They're oven-ready in individual heat-and-serve trays. With Swanson TV turkey dinners, you just heat and you serve big and hearty slices of moist, tender Swanson turkey with grand giblet gravy and special cornbread dressing and fluffy whipped sweet potatoes with golden Swanson butter and garden fresh peas with more butter.
Mother Murphy, lucky me. My wife uses Swanson TV turkey dinners. And make your husband lucky, too. Get Swanson TV turkey dinners, Swanson TV fried chicken dinners, Swanson TV beef dinners from your grocer's big freezer.
So, yeah, swell dinner. So those were the early days of a concerted effort by the food industry to get people to stop cooking so much. And around that time was when McDonald's became a national success story. Their first store was in 1955 in Illinois. And within 10 years, there were 700 stores. By 1983, there were 6,000 stores. And for the next 2 decades, the company opened about 360 locations every year. And today they have about 14,000 McDonald's outlets in the US, many more globally. And today they're, in total, for all the fast food chains, there's 232,000 fast food stores or restaurants, if you can even, I don't even really call them restaurants, but representing about $200 billion in revenue. So a big shift in how people are eating took place over those 3 or 4 decades. And you know, so we're at the point now where this is from a Gallup survey in 2013. It shows 8 in 10 Americans report eating at fast food restaurants at least monthly. And about half of those, or 40% of Americans, eat at fast food weekly. So that's a really big representation of the population, even now. This is from 2013, so about 2 years ago. And then the even more amazing thing is that in this survey, people were asked about how they feel about fast food. And most people said, yeah, I know it's kind of crappy, but I eat there anyway. 76% of people said that the food served in fast food restaurants is, quote unquote, not too good or not good at all for you. So people know, they have at least a conceptual notion of what is and what isn't nutritious and good for them. But a lot of people have not. It's very different from internalizing it the way maybe a lot of people, a lot of you and people at this conference have, and made it an emotionally connected understanding of what it means, the connection between our food and our health. I think people think, yeah, it's not that good for me, but you know, it's not going to kill me. I'll be fine. Which is, you know, if you're eating it, you know, moderately, you're probably right about that. But if you're eating it regularly and you're eating it a couple times a week, that's absolutely not the case. So we're now at the point where, when you look at the mountains of food in grocery stores and all the consumption at fast food restaurants, we're at the point where 70% of our calories, this is the average American diet, 70% of our calories are coming from processed food, which is the highly processed food we've been talking about. So what really does that mean? I mean, what is processed food? What is all this stuff that we're eating? And I started wondering about that when I started covering food about 10 years ago. And I was covering it as a business journalist. I had written about business for a number of years. And I started looking at all this food differently. And I just wondered what was behind it. And I started talking to people in the industry. I started talking to food scientists. I didn't really know what food scientists did, or that there was even a career called food scientist. But it's a very elaborate and complicated and thriving career. And I started going to these trade shows, which were they blew me away. They were a fascinating window into what the world of food had become. And there was this one called the Institute of Food Technologists, and this is one of the food industry's largest gatherings. There's about 1,500 companies that exhibit at this thing, and most of them are ingredient companies. So they're making all these things, these weird ingredients that go into processed food. And as I walked around and talked to people at these different companies, they all told me these stories about their food, and a lot of them had created these prototype foods with their ingredients in them. So you know, I went around and I went to this one booth where these people were selling these fake fruit bits, fake blueberry bits, and they had made these muffins that had fake blueberries in them that were made with sugar, flour, cornstarch, and just really a dash of pulverized blueberries, but enough so that food manufacturers could use them to say made with real blueberries, and try and convince people that they were actually using blueberries in their product, such as this one. If the guy hadn't told me, I ate one of the blueberry muffins, and if the guy hadn't told me, I would have thought that they were real blueberries. It was extremely convincing. But the amazing thing about this was that the guy was so proud of this, that his product simulated blueberries, and it was a very effective way for food manufacturers to cut down on cost and not have to use real food, in this case, blueberries. I went to another booth where a guy was talking about his specially modified starches and other types of ingredients that could cut down on the amount of meat that fast food makers could use. And at the time, their starches and some of their products were being used at Taco Bell. And it was on the ingredient list as isolated oat product. And this became something that people started wondering about when Taco Bell, do you remember, probably about 6 years ago now, that Taco Bell was sued for not having much meat in their tacos. The lawsuit didn't go anywhere, but people started looking at Taco Bell's ingredients, and there was at one point when the CEO of Taco Bell was on Good Morning America with George Stephanopoulos, and he said, I have to ask you, what is isolated oat product? Like, why is that in a taco? And it was amazing because the CEO had absolutely no idea. Even the CEO didn't know what was in the food and why it was in there. And he just said something, well, everything's in there for a specific reason and it's all flavorings. But in the case of isolated oat product, it's actually not flavorings. It's so that they can use less meat. It's a binder and a filler. And then I went around and talked to other people and ate more food, and I felt awful afterwards, by the way. At the end of the day, I ate all this horrible food, which a lot of it tasted good at the time, though. You don't really notice that it's horrible until after. I had samples of beef barbacoa, which this was a flavor company that had made this. And this beef barbacoa was neither beef nor barbacoa. It was not slow roasted with spices. It had been quickly cooked and then frozen and reheated. And it was chicken. It wasn't beef. So it had been made to taste like chicken with an extremely convincing natural beef-type flavoring. And it was made from hydrolyzed yeast extract and MSG. And it was extremely convincing as well. I would have thought that it was, actual beef barbacoa. Certainly that it was beef and not chicken. I talked to other companies about their fake Greek yogurt. There was a company that was selling starches where you could, instead of this was at the time that Greek yogurt was taking the country by storm, and instead of actually buying these expensive straining machines to make Greek yogurt, you could just add in starches to thicken the product, and these cheap protein concentrates, milk protein concentrate, to give it the extra protein that Greek yogurt has. And I looked at the guy who was telling me about all this, and I thought, and I said, well, people are buying Greek yogurt because they think it's a certain type of thing, and aren't you just duping consumers? And he looked at me and he said, well, which kind of his face told me, okay, yes, and he said, but the FDA has no standards for what is Greek yogurt. Basically saying that as long as they could get away with it, they would. The FDA, there's no, nobody really knows what Greek yogurt is. You can't say what Greek yogurt is, so this is absolutely fine. And for a while, it was in stores. Yoplait was using this technology, I guess you could call it, to make fake Greek yogurt, and some of the store brands were. But the good news is now they've all stopped doing that, and they actually do the proper straining of Greek yogurt. And it wasn't until I tasted a I have another side. Yeah, this was a guy that told me that I asked what his company did, and he said, we build milk backwards. And it took me a while to actually figure out what he was talking about. And this is a very simplified version of what he was talking about. It's all these processed products that you can get from milk. And all those are different ingredients that get added into processed food for a variety of reasons. The milk protein concentrate is the one that goes, and whey protein concentrate goes into Kraft Singles, and into the fake Greek yogurts. But it wasn't until I tasted this this parfait type product with like a single strawberry on top, that I really started to feel like Alice in Wonderland. Because I didn't know, I tasted it and it was kind of vanilla-ish, but I didn't know, I was like, is it pudding? Is it, what is this product? And I went up to the people behind the booth, and it was a starch company that was selling it, one of the really big ingredient companies, and they were featuring one of their modified starches and crystalline fructose as a sweetener. So I knew that was in it, but I was like, what is the actual food in it? Like, what is this? What do we call this? And that was perhaps the strangest question she had had all day, because she just stared at me. She had absolutely no idea what this product was or what was in it. And she looked at her colleague, and they both just shrugged their shoulders. And so finally she said, well, it's a cultured dairy product. Oh, and I said, oh, okay, well, so it's yogurt. No, it's not yogurt. It's a pulverized ingredient. It's some kind of fermented or cultured dairy product that's been powdered, and you add water to it. And I suddenly realized that was what was happening throughout this convention and in the food industry at large. So many of the ingredients that are going into processed food are just that. They're powders, and they come from 4 main commodity crops, cheaply produced commodity crops: wheat, soybeans, corn, and milk. And these are used to create all different kinds of products. The biggest ones are obviously high fructose corn syrup, soybean oil, corn oil, all the powders that you get from milk, and refined grains and flours from wheat. And if you look at a lot of products at fast food restaurants or in the grocery store, you'll see that if you look at the individual ingredients, you realize that a majority of them are exactly that, these powders that are coming from these 4 commodity crops. So, and what the food industry is doing, as I started talking to more and more people in the industry, I started noticing that a lot of people would use the word application. Like they'd say, well, this is something for a meat application or a cheese application. And I thought, an application? What, aren't we talking about food? And that's a term that people in Silicon Valley use. I lived in Silicon Valley for a while, writing about the technology industry. And an app is short for application. It's a software program. So essentially what the food industry is doing and what food scientists are doing is engineering these individual ingredients, these processed ingredients, into things that they're selling as food. But to me, they're not food. That's not food. And I started to, when I would go to these conferences, and especially the first time, I went to them several times, I kind of started to feel like I was crazy, because everyone else seemed to think that this was totally normal. There was no shame in doing this and using these powdered ingredients to replace real food in products in order to make food cheaper and more and easier and more efficient for the food manufacturers. This was the way business was done, and it wasn't particularly new. It had been this way for some time. And here I was. I mean, I kind of felt like a stranger in a strange land, because at least at the time there weren't many journalists or outsiders that would go to these conferences. I mean, why would you? It was people that worked in the food industry or trade journalists that would write about this, and they were just so used to it. And here I was coming in with this very outdated and traditional notion that food was something that had to have come from a farm and had to have a connection to a farm and had to resemble something that came from a farm. But that wasn't the way the people in the food industry thought about it at all. At least not, publicly when they're talking about it. They might have private moments where they think something differently. So, to me, food is something that must have a connection to the earth. It's something that's where the source of food is, something that has to be nourishing. I mean, we can't survive without the nourishment that comes from food. And the problem in the food industry is that the more you process something, the more you take away that connection to the sunlight, the soil, the earth, that it comes from, and that is the source of all the nourishment of our food. So, people in the food industry will dispute this, right? They'll say, maybe some of you heard them say, I've certainly had many conversations with people. Well, they'll say, food processing isn't new. It's been around for millennia, since cavemen were cooking over a fire. And they'll point to things like, well, all food is processed, and they'll say, and here's a slide I took from someone who's a food science professor at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, where his slide is basically saying, well, what isn't a processed food, right? Everything's a processed food. I mean, what's the problem? And he's using the example of apples and lettuce and potatoes. But, it's all very misleading, because those are nobody's definition of processed food. An apple, potatoes, and lettuce. That is not processed food. Those are minimally processed foods, of which is a whole category, and these are things that, yes, most food has been processed in some sense, but these are things that have retained their nutritional value. They have not been completely disfigured by food scientists. They have a direct connection to the farm and to how they were grown. So, and then they'll say things like, well, what we do inside our factories is just a larger scale version of what you do at home. And that is also not the case. What happens inside the processed food industry is very different than what goes on at home. It's the result of all kinds of really intensely high heat processing, chemical hydrogenation, hydrolyzation, bleaching. And this is one of my favorite food processing machines. It's an extruder, a twin screw extruder. And you can see where it's an incredibly efficient machine. You see the barrel on the top. It's where you put basically everything that's going to go into this product goes into the barrel. And then it gets churned up inside, or into the bin rather, and then the barrel, it goes through the barrel and it gets churned up by these screws, these really intense screws under incredibly high pressure that creates heat. And it's not like a blender that you would use at home, even like a really souped up high-tech blender. It molecularly melds food together. So it takes protein molecules or starch molecules and what's called denatures them, and basically rips them apart and blends them together in a way that they can never go back to their original state. And then at the end of the process, the food, and extruders are used to make some cereals, a lot of bars, snack foods like Cheetos and cheese puffs, and everything comes out, it sort of puffs out at the end, and you can have any kind of shape you want at the end. The food just extrudes out of the other side of the barrel. So who has a food extruder at home in their kitchen, right? Like, who has that? Or a gun puffing machine, or 150 horsepower spray drying machine? I certainly don't. So the problem with all this industrial manipulation of our food is twofold. There's two problems. And one is that it destroys nutrition. Have you ever wondered why it's very, very difficult to go down the cereal aisle? Actually, it's nearly impossible, unless you're in the natural section, to find a box of cereal that doesn't have a whole list of added vitamins and minerals. And this is one example, chocolate Lucky Charms, right? And they're adding it in. If food is really healthy, these are all being added in at the end of manufacturing. None of this is coming inherently from the grains itself. Even if it was there, present at the beginning of manufacturing, which in this case it probably isn't, a lot of it gets destroyed in the manufacturing process because of all the machinery and the high heat that food is exposed to. So, food that is inherently nutritious should be able to speak for itself. It doesn't need to have basically a multivitamin sprinkled in. So you can see how potentially misleading this could be to look on the nutrition facts panel and see a whole range of, if you could see all the numbers, but they're all, they look like 25% and of all these nutrients. So someone looking at that might think, well, it's not too bad. It's kind of healthy. I'm getting all these vitamins. And also, and then fiber too. I don't know if this one, I can't see if this one has fiber, probably not. But that's something that gets destroyed quite a lot in food processing. So you see fiber added to a lot of products, these added fiber, whether it's inulin or oat fiber or something. They add it back in. So in response to these criticisms about food processing, the food industry will say that, well, there's nothing inherently wrong with food processing. It's really just what you add to the food at the end, like if it has too much sugar or salt or additives. But that's actually not true either. I would argue that it's exactly the active industrial processing that is the problem with a lot of these foods. I mean, think of something like high fructose corn syrup. I mean, that comes from the very beginning of its life. It comes from actual ears of corn that are grown on a farm. And that corn would have lots of iron, magnesium, vitamin B6, and fiber. And what happens to all of that by the time you get to high fructose corn syrup? Well, it's lost in a complex series of processing steps. Another example is trans fat. I mean, trans fat is a processing problem. Way back, I actually started the process for it's partially hydrogenated oil is what has trans fat in it. And that process actually started a long time ago in the early 20th century. And somebody realized that if you heated vegetable oil, liquid vegetable oil, in the presence, hot enough, in the presence of a metal catalyst, such as nickel, it would transform from being liquid to solid or semi-solid at room temperature. And this was incredibly useful for all sorts of things in food processing. It made it more like butter, but it was way cheaper than butter because you could get it from soybean or corns. And the first product of this was Crisco, which was, I think, 1910 maybe, or 1912. Crisco first came on the market. So nobody would have thought that just doing this kind of manipulation, this processing, would have a problem, because if you look at these are just not to get too sciencey, but these are molecules, two different molecules. The first one is just a normal polyunsaturated molecule, which is like polyunsaturated oil is vegetable oil, basically, soybean, corn, or sunflower. And then the second one is a trans fat molecule. What happens to it after you do this partial hydrogenation process? And you can see that it's really, I mean, it's nothing. It's basically just a hydrogen atom that's in a different place on the molecule. So you wouldn't think that that would be an issue, but it turns out that it is. When we ingest trans fats, they cause all kinds of metabolic havoc inside our bodies. The second thing that's an issue with all this industrial manipulation is that it destroys flavor. So food, obviously, we all know, I mean, you add spices to it when you cook and you enhance the flavor, but it has a certain inherent flavor to it. After you've processed it many times, gone through many machines, high heat, inside factories in the food industry, a lot of flavor is gone, just completely destroyed. And especially if you're freezing it, like frozen foods, frozen meats, and then reheating it, it does even more damage to flavor. So that's why flavors, the flavor industry, whether it's natural flavors or artificial flavors, is the single biggest category of food additives that go into food. Without flavorings, manufactured flavorings, there would be no processed food. You simply couldn't do it. Nobody would eat it. It would taste terrible. So, and then the other cheap ingredients that food manufacturers add for flavor are salt and sugar, obviously. And I mean, I'm not here to say that we should never eat salt or sugar. I mean, I have my salt shaker close by when I cook at home. It really helps enhance the flavor of food. But it's very different. The amount of salt and the amount of sugar that food manufacturers are adding to their food is on a completely different level than what you would add at home. Like a few months ago, not too long ago, I bought the soup for my kids. I don't know if you guys shop at Whole Foods, and if you ever go there, and if you're like me, sometimes I go and I don't think everything in the store is healthy, because clearly it's not. But I don't look at the labels. I don't read the ingredients. I just assume, well, it's okay. So I bought this soup for my kids, Elmo soup. I don't buy it very often, every once in a while, because I know it's made with white flour. It's not very healthy, but I thought, well, just once in a while. And then when I was home, I looked at the label. It has almost half a teaspoon of salt in the can, which for my kids, like, they'll easily eat a whole can of it. And if you were making food at home, if you were making soup at home, that amount of soup, try adding half a teaspoon of salt into it and see what it tastes like. It's nowhere near, you would never add anywhere near that. And sugar is the same thing. Just this morning I was over at the coffee place and I had oatmeal, the Quaker oatmeal, those little tins, and I tasted it and I was like, my God, this is awful. It's so sweet. And I looked at the and I basically, it was also there was like hardly any oats in there, so I had to put 2 in to get the normal amount of oatmeal that I would eat. And between the 2 of them, it's 28 grams of sugar. So it's about 4 teaspoons of sugar. And there's no way, when I make oatmeal at home, I put in probably about 2, at the most 2 teaspoons, so about half of that. So what's happening is that people that are eating a lot of processed food are getting used to, and we get used to it. If I started eating that oatmeal on a regular basis, I wouldn't start to notice the sugary taste of it. I'd start to think it was normal. Oh, it's fine. It's not too sugary. People get used to it. Your taste buds adjust. So people that are eating a lot of processed food are going around and consuming large amounts of sugar and salt or sodium, and they don't even realize it because they just get used to it. And this is, on the issue of sodium, it's not just salt that's being added to food. I wanted to find this out when I was writing the book, but no one has actually done an analysis of this to look at how much of the sodium that we're consuming, because the average American is consuming way too much sodium, how much of it's coming not from salt, but sodium-based additives. And this is just a list of all the sodium-based additives that get added to food. Doesn't contribute anything in the way of taste. It's all in there for various reasons, for food preservation and other means that are useful to food manufacturers. Yeah, some of the there's been a lot of scrutiny of salt in soups. So Campbell's and the other brands have really tried to cut down. It's actually like the bigger problem for sodium is restaurants. If you go to chain restaurants, you could easily have a full teaspoon, which is more than the daily amount of sodium, in your one portion of a meal, which is absurd because a full teaspoon of salt, I mean, that's a lot of salt, right, in terms of taste. Or some of it could be coming from the sodium additives too. So what you end up with is food that has too much of the bad stuff and not enough of the good stuff. It's an excessive amount of sugar, salt, refined grains like white flour, and strange additives that nobody on the planet ate until about 100 years ago, or some of them are even newer than that. There's a total of 3,000 food additives that are allowed to be added to our food, which is that's an astronomical number. But just as important, and this doesn't get talked about as much as salt and sugar and food additives, just as important is what's not in processed food, and that's nutrition. All the things that our bodies need to stay healthy, not just the vitamins and minerals, because sometimes those are added, as we saw, but the antioxidants, all this huge category of phytochemicals that you find in plant foods that occur naturally from Mother Nature, that are also destroyed by processing, and food companies have not figured out how to add those back into food yet. They're working on it, but so our bodies are missing out on all these things that help protect us from diseases and help keep us healthy, feeling good, keep our energy levels high. So we can see how this is working out for us. It's not just, obesity is obviously one of the biggest problems, if not the biggest, and it's the one that gets talked about a lot. But there's other issues too. So you can see that 80% of U.S. healthcare costs are directly tied to poor lifestyle choices, which means essentially that 80% of our spending, which is huge, are coming from things that are essentially preventable, and the biggest component of that is diet. So the choices that we're making of what we eat, what we put on the table, and what we put in our mouths, and it's other diseases as well. At this point, 12% of Americans have diabetes, but another 37% have what's known as prediabetes. Sometimes it's called metabolic syndrome. It's where the basic function of energy metabolism isn't working very well, and if left unchecked, will lead to diabetes. If these trends continue by 2030, which hopefully the trends will not continue, 1 adult in 10 will have diabetes by 2030, which hopefully will not be the case. So these are completely preventable diseases. Autoimmune disorders are on the rise. There's a food component to many of those. A number of cancers are on the rise. Some of that, it's unclear to what extent food is causing cancer. With some cancers, there's definitely a link. Others, not so much. But food is one of the things what is clear is food is one of the things that can help us protect against cancer, particularly some of those antioxidants I was mentioning that occur in plant foods. It just helps fend off all the things that the other things that might be causing cancer, like stress, sedentary lifestyles, environmental toxins. If you're eating a diet high in these antioxidants and fiber, you're getting protection against all of that stuff that you're just probably encountering on a normal daily basis in our modern lives. So, and it's not just people that are eating. Sometimes you can think, well, it's just the people that are going to fast food all the time. And I don't eat soda, and I eat pretty healthy. But the costs get spread out over our society, and one of the most visible ways is through health insurance premiums, which have risen 200% since 1999. Most of that coming from worker contributions, the amount that workers are paying. And I think this is from employer-sponsored plans. And meanwhile, wages have grown 50%, so not even close to the same growth rate. The good news, there is some good news. It's not all completely doom and gloom. The annual volume of packaged food sales is down 1% for the past 2 years, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's significant. I mean, the food industry is used to growing every year, growing their sales, and the effort that a lot of people here, in the food movement, many of whom are here at this conference, and people like yourselves that care about food and the broken food system, clearly it's having an effect. There's no question about that. And the food manufacturers are starting to feel that. Some people have suggested we're at the point of peak burger, that McDonald's same-store sales are down. They're really not opening any new stores. It might be this is all the fast food that we're going to eat, which would be a very positive thing. Then there's other things. There's a big movement among food manufacturers to do what they call clean label. So they remove some of the most offensive and suspicious or scary sounding additives from their food. Like Subway took out that yoga mat chemical, azodicarbonamide, from their bread. Panera Bread, this is all just very recently. Panera Bread banned artificial ingredients. Taco Bell took out even Taco Bell, right? I mean, they're some of the cheapest food out there and most additive laden. At least it's been that way. Removed artificial flavors and colors. Not all artificial ingredients, because they actually probably couldn't make their food at the cost level that they're doing it without other artificial ingredients. But they're taking out flavors and colors. And then there's more awareness about how meat is produced, not in terms of animal welfare. I mean, that's a whole other quantum leap in terms of the consciousness of most Americans, unfortunately, but the use of antibiotics on the farm is gaining a lot of concern and attention, and it's spreading throughout the culture, which is good. So Walmart, McDonald's, and Tyson's have all put restrictions on antibiotic use in chicken production. There's no word on pork and beef yet, but they're starting with chicken. So it's a move in the right direction. These things are unfortunately can be very slow moving. But I think that at the same time we have to be careful, certainly not to claim victory. And a lot of these announcements, like all these companies taking out these ingredients from their food, it's really small victories. I mean, you're starting with something that doesn't have much nourishment, and you're making it a little bit better. I mean, what is that really doing? Does that really help? My concern is that it is potentially giving a health halo to some of these foods, and people are thinking, oh, well now, you know, Gatorade doesn't have brominated vegetable oil, so maybe it's good, maybe it's better. But meanwhile, it's still artificially colored sugar water. And we've actually seen this before. This isn't the first time that the food industry has focused on what they call clean label. I'm going to play another great time capsule ad, this one from 1984, for Breyer's ice cream.
Before you eat your ice cream, read it.
Ammonium bicarbonate, sodium alginate, polysorbate 80.
Breyer's ice cream is very easy to read. Like delicious Breyer's strawberry. Just 4 natural ingredients. Pure milk, fresh cream, sugar, and strawberries.
Sodium phosphate, malic acid, locust beans.
Breyer's, the all-natural ice cream. It's good reading.
Locust beans?
So what's interesting about that is that at some point, I don't know when, but at some point Breyer's decided that they didn't really need to have those 4 simple ingredients that consumers either didn't care or weren't going to pay attention. Because if you look at Breyer's strawberry ice cream now, it actually has not just those 4 ingredients, but whey and tarragon, and tarragon being very, very similar to locust beans. And also, if you look at some of their other varieties, you have mono and diglycerides in the butter pecan variety. The black raspberry chocolate has carabine gum, guar gum, and carrageenan in it. And the fat-free varieties, which, I mean, fat-free ice cream is just an oxymoron, right? I think it's a product that should not exist. That has propylene glycol in it. So, but hopefully what we're seeing today on the part of the food manufacturers is reflective of a much bigger, I don't know what to call it, a food revolution among American people, and that it's not a superficial thing that we saw in the 80s that they're going to respond to, that it's something much more profound and permanent. So, and there's a lot, and that's what I believe. I mean, I think there's a lot of evidence to show that we're on our way towards something. And then, but there still are lots of other problems. One of them is food marketing to kids, which I haven't seen very much progress on. There's actually a lot of focus when I first started writing about food 10 years ago on food marketing to kids, and there was reports coming out and people were talking about it. Today it feels like it's really not being talked about at all. And you can see an example here in this next slide. Coke says that they do not market to children at all. And here are some pictures of Coke not marketing to children. The one on the top left and the bottom are from the US. The top left is a Gatorade Final Four or something or other. And then the one on the bottom is a Coca-Cola Fit program, some kind of physical activity, a program that they have. And then the one on the top of the little kid running with the Coke thing everywhere is from Austria. You know, turning around our health crisis depends not on, you know, eating these less bad versions of food that's not very nourishing. It really depends on switching to a diet that's grounded in real food, food that's grown, not made, food that's closer to the ground and hasn't been completely disfigured by food scientists. And the way the inevitable part of that is that we have to talk about cooking. We have to start teaching our kids how to cook. We're raising the 3rd generation of children that don't know how to cook and don't know, maybe don't know where food comes from and just don't know the basics about how to produce a simple home-cooked meal. And we need to figure out a way to address that as a society. Over in the UK, there was a recent initiative. It was led by Jamie Oliver, who is a celebrity chef, and he's been really involved in trying to address some of these issues. And he and others were successful at getting cooking classes, very simple, basic, fun cooking classes implemented in all schools at the early levels, and basically their elementary and middle schools. And this is a huge achievement. I think it's going to be much harder to get that here, given the resource strap situation with public schools. But it's something that we need to start talking about. And originally I was really dismayed at what Michelle Obama was doing. I mean, on one hand, she's raising the issue of childhood obesity, which is good, but she did a lot of sort of hand-holding with food manufacturers and Walmart, and let's just reformulate and take out the sugar and salt and add some more whole grains, and everything is going to be great. And she's finally getting into talking about cooking, and she has a offshoot program called Let's Cook. But I would argue that her program should not have been titled Let's Move. It should have been Let's Cook from the beginning, because it's a much more, the role that research shows that exercise obviously is very important for a lot of our health. It does all sorts of things to keep us healthy, but it's not great for weight loss. It's good for weight maintenance. So after you've lost weight, it's good to exercise. But if you want to lose weight, exercise is not really the best way to get there. You have to get there through food. So if she really cared about kids losing weight, it would have been Let's Cook from the beginning. And this isn't, some people like to say that, well, that's just an elitist idea, that cooking, right? I mean, it's been drummed into us, in part from all the messages that the food industry has given, that cooking is hard, it's slave labor, it's hot in the kitchen, who wants to do that? And it's really not. It certainly takes a little bit more time and effort, but not a whole lot more. And it doesn't necessarily take more money. There are so many meals, there's so many examples of meals that you can cook at home, made from vegetables, legumes, whole grains, that are less expensive, no more expensive, or even less expensive than foods you would buy at the supermarket in the frozen aisle or at fast food restaurants. When I was writing the book, I spent some time with this organization called Cooking Matters, which has these it's for lower income Americans, and they have free cooking classes in most states where they teach people how to cook, and they usually have it in either at schools or in churches where they have kitchens, and they give people, they have a recipe each time, and it's simple recipes, it's not elaborate, and each recipe is designed to be no more than $10, the cost of buying it, $10 for a family of 4, right? So very affordable. And then they give people these ingredients when they leave the class to cook at home. It's a wonderful program. And we need to see more of that. And here's just an example I use in terms of looking at the cost of junk food versus healthy food. A banana, which is a very healthy snack, very convenient. You just peel it, and very widely available, is actually cheaper than junk food. So 27 cents for a medium-sized banana versus 2 servings of potato chips, because, who eats 1 serving, right? That's like 5 chips. You'd probably eat more like 5 servings. But I was conservative with 2 servings, and the cost of that is 40 cents. So there's a lot of reasons why people would choose to eat potato chips for a snack, including me. I'm sure I've done it, instead of a banana. But price isn't one of them. So I'm not advocating for any kind of return to the Donna Reed era. Processed food has its place. It's a welcome addition to our lives, and it's probably more stressful, especially if you have kids, but even if you don't, to try and avoid all processed food. And it's probably more of a deterrent to your health to try and do that than to, incorporate some processed food into our lives and be okay with that and accept it. But if we care about our health, if we care about our energy levels and our vitality, if we care about our kids and the attention level that our kids have and the moods of our kids and our own moods, if we care about our healthcare costs, and just care about generally the future of our country, we need to flip that ratio of 70-30 so that we're now getting 30% of our food from processed food, or less. 30% is kind of, a conservative, and 70% of it coming from fresh food, unprocessed food, things that are, things that have some resemblance to something that grew on a farm once. And there's so many issues. It can get kind of overwhelming when you look at the problems with the broken food system. There's a lot of things that people at this conference have talked about and that need to be discussed, like the benefits of organic food, the horrible brutality of factory farming, overfishing, dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico because of fertilizer runoff coming from farms all up into the Midwest, the misuse of antibiotics, and these are all really, really big issues. But we can't expect people to go from Betty Crocker to Alice Waters straight overnight. You know, it's a lot. You have to look at where most people in this country are in terms of their food choices and how they think about food. So I think that the conversation really we have to start the conversation here, talking about the need to migrate from a diet that's based on the processed stuff that the food manufacturers and the food giants have been making for us to a diet that is rooted, or the primary aspect of it is coming from foods that are grown, not made, foods that have a connection to the earth and that have all the nourishment that that Mother Nature intended. Yeah, thank you very much. So if anyone has any questions, happy to try and answer them at least.
Good morning. Thank you so much. That was awesome. You talked a little bit earlier about restrictions. What does that really mean?
What do you mean restrictions?
When you were talking about some of the benefits that different people have done, different steps, and you said that some of them have restricted antibiotics.
Oh, okay.
What does that mean?
Yeah, I know it sounds good in the headlines, right? But you have to look at it. A lot of them are they're restricting. I mean, it depends on which company we're talking about, but some of them are just restricting. Basically, if I'm remembering correctly, I think Walmart and McDonald's are restricting human antibiotics that are used in human health, and they're restricting them not completely from farms, but just for growth promotion purposes. For a long time, the factory farmers have used, the agriculture industry, have used antibiotics because they actually make the animals get fatter quickly and put on more weight, which has some troubling implications for antibiotic residue in our food. If we're consuming this antibiotic residue and it's having an effect and changing it, the way it works is probably by changing our gut bacteria, the types of bacteria in our gut in a way that could be promoting obesity in us. That hasn't been proven by science yet, but it's a very real possibility, and it's something that people are looking at. Anyway, so this is something that's been used in animal agriculture to make the animals to change their gut bacteria so they put on more weight quickly and are more prone to gaining muscle and fat. So the companies are saying, okay, we're not going to use it for growth promotion, but they're still going to use it for. I mean, the other reason that farmers are using antibiotics is because of overcrowded condition. I mean, you cram a bunch of animals into a barn, you're going to get disease, right? It's a breeding ground for disease. And they're still going to use the antibiotics for those preventative measures, which is just I mean, the real problem is the overcrowding. If you didn't have that overcrowding and you had better animal welfare, you wouldn't need those antibiotics for prevention purposes. So there's still going to be antibiotics used, for Walmart and Tyson as well. It's going to be less, but they're still going to be used. So the problem hasn't really been solved.
Thank you. Okay, can you address a little bit about germinated and dehydrated foods and the benefits of that?
Yeah, I don't know. I honestly will tell you, I don't know that much about germinated foods. So it's not a subject that I can speak too much on. I know that there's a lot of benefit to raw foods because I don't believe in a fully raw diet, but I think that there's a lot of enzymes that raw foods have that are really beneficial for our bodies and also help us digest food a lot better, and may also have an impact on our gut bacteria. But I honestly don't know that much about germination. So.
Okay, so I'd like to share that Ann Wigmore was my personal mentor back in '85. And one of the things that we do is germinate. And I'm entering into Casa de Amparo, which is a refuge place for children 18 to 25 years. And if anybody has had not any experience with it, I have some germinated and dehydrated pumpkin seeds. And we're actually teaching our clients to take germinated seeds to the schools. And we have 7 schools right now that the kids are just eating them. You know, kids are bringing them in, they're sprouting them, they're germinating them, taking them in, and trying them out. So if anybody would like to find out and join our initiative, Our Children, Our Future, talk to me before we go to lunch. Thank you.
Thanks.
Why do we have to soak nuts?
Do we have to soak nuts?
I don't want to. I just want to eat them. If I buy nuts that are raw and healthy, why are they telling us that we got to soak them in water?
Right.
And I've done it. It doesn't taste as good.
Yeah, I mean, right, something with phytic acid. Yeah, I don't go to that level, right? So I don't. Nuts are an incredibly healthy snack, incredibly healthy to add to food. So they have lots of great fats in them, fiber. So I don't soak my nuts. So I think if you want to, it probably does make them a little bit healthier, especially if you're concerned about phytic acid. But you certainly don't need to. From my opinion.
In 1909. Procter & Gamble got the patent for hydrogenation and for partially hydrogenating. So that was in keeping with the 1910, 1912 of the Crisco coming out. And I also wanted to say when they do laboratory tests to make lab rats fat, they use monosodium glutamate. And the website truthandlabeling.org, I don't know if you've checked it out, it starts to list the different things that are actually hidden in the foods as food additives for MSG.
Yeah, I mean, some people are concerned about glutamate or glutamic acid in their food. It's I'm aware of those studies where they use MSG to make lab animals fat for purposes of the study. It's just one more example of how the food industry is constantly taking food apart and manipulating it. So to create MSG or any of these other MSG-like additives like hydrolyzed vegetable protein or autolyzed yeast, or there's a whole long list of them. They're ripping apart, often chemically, ripping apart protein molecules to get the glutamic acid, which is a component of one of the amino acids in protein. So it's just the model of when you start taking food apart and having something that's normally bound molecularly to other things, like when you eat food, there's glutamic acid in all kinds of food that we eat, but it's bound up into these molecules. You start separating it out and getting free glutamic acid, it functions very differently in our bodies. You start tinkering around, and sometimes you create a giant mess, as we've seen with trans fat.
Hi, I apologize because I was a little bit late. You may have covered this, but I was really curious about your stand on GMOs and organic, especially in all the fast food. I mean, Chipotle just went all non-GMO, but other than that, I mean, fast food and packaged food is just saturated with that, and there's a huge labeling issue and all that. So what do you think about that?
I was trying to avoid GMOs because it's so controversial, but it's a good it's definitely worth talking about. My feeling on GMOs is that they should absolutely be labeled. We should know what's in our food. The fact that the food industry is fighting it is ridiculous. There's a zillion things on the label that we know about is in our food. This would just be one more thing. It's not going to be a skull and crossbones, except if, you know, for the people that really care about it. Most people will just ignore the labels, but it should be labeled. You know, I think there's an open question about the health implications of GMOs. If you really look at the science, you know, and I think you have to. They certainly haven't been proven safe, but I haven't seen a ton of evidence that shows that there's a human health aspect. But there are other reasons to avoid GMOs because of the way, not necessarily because of the technology itself, but because of the way it's been used. I mean, it's basically been used to feed the factory farming monocropping system of agriculture, which is kind of a fight against nature. You know, it's not working in any way trying to work with nature, which is what organic production does. It's trying to beat it down, which you know, nature's always going to win. You know, we're just not going to be able to outsmart nature, not anytime soon in our evolution anyway. So, like with Roundup, you know, these crops that are genetically modified to tolerate Roundup, you know, we've seen super weeds developing because of that, and the weeds have outsmarted Monsanto and found a way to become resistant. So, so you have these fields where there's, you know, they're not killing the weeds as glyphosate or Roundup is not killing the weeds like they're supposed to. So what is the response of Monsanto and DuPont and the other chemical companies? Well, it's to just escalate the chemical arms race and to find new chemicals that they can spray on fields that will kill these weeds. You know, and it doesn't take very much logic to figure out that maybe in another 10, 20, 30 years that those weeds will become resistant to the new chemicals that are being sprayed on them. So I think the way genetically modified technology has been applied is the real problem. I mean, there's some, you know, you could look at drought-tolerant maize and things like that actually isn't a viable technology yet. Monsanto just talks about it. That there could be some beneficial aspects to that. I don't know. I mean, I think it has to be evaluated. But the way it's been applied has been. I mean, it really only benefits Monsanto. You could argue it benefits the farmers a little bit because it makes farming a little bit easier, but it doesn't make it easier if then you're dealing with super weeds down the road. So it's certainly not benefiting consumers in the least. It's just benefiting mostly the biotech companies.
I was curious about your research. Did you come up against any roadblocks and had to maybe go in a different direction? Is this stuff easily available? I just bought your book, so I haven't read it yet. Yeah. I was just glancing through some of the footnotes and so on. Yeah. But I'm curious about, you know, how do you go about getting all this stuff, and were there any problems?
Well, yeah, I mean, the food industry is very careful about what they say. So that's why I ended up talking to a lot of the ingredient companies, because they're not in the public eye. They're not these like big publicly traded companies that everyone knows. So they were a lot more willing to talk to me and tell me about how food is made and about their processes. The food manufacturers, the big companies, the fast food companies, and the food like Kellogg's and McDonald's and General Mills and Pepsi, to some extent, they would talk to me. Some of them wouldn't at all. Like General Mills and Kellogg were horrible. They did not want to talk at all. They're a lot more. They have, you know, very elaborate press departments, and they're very careful about what they say. And like I mentioned, none of them would let me inside any of their cereal plants to talk about how their cereal is made, how their product is made. And they say it's for proprietary reasons. But you know, I'm not going to go and like take pictures and send it to their competitor. I mean, that's a So yeah, there were a lot of, you know, difficulties and there definitely is a lot of secrecy in the food industry. Yeah, but you know, you find ways around it. Yeah. I mean, I'd been thinking about it for a long time and collecting notes and talking to people, but in terms of actually intensely working on it, it was maybe about 1.5 years, 2 years. Yeah.
I originally was going to ask almost exactly what you did, because I'm a fellow journalist in food issues as well, and I know there's a lot of roadblocks trying to get the information, and people don't want to talk to you, or you get the exact same PR statement back that doesn't answer your question. So I was wondering if you had maybe a funny story or a situation that was quite difficult in your writings.
Well, I mean, one of the things I really wanted to do was to go to one of the earliest conversations I had that really spiked my interest was I was talking to an oil chemist, and he was telling me about how vegetable oil is made. Because if you actually look, vegetable oil is one of the biggest. It's actually contributing somewhere between 5 and 10% of our total calories coming from vegetable oil. And the biggest part of that is soybean oil. And so he was telling me about how vegetable oil is made, and he said, well, they have to be, these factories, they have to be explosion proof. And I thought, aren't we making food? Like, why is it explosion proof? And he said, well, that's because of the hexane. And it turns out that the way you get the oil out of soybeans and corn and canola is by drenching it in hexane. And hexane, if anyone knows, is it's a product, it's a direct product of the petroleum refining process. So basically the same process that gives you gasoline gives you hexane and a bunch of other things. And it's a neurotoxic chemical and it's very flammable. So that was why these factories have to be explosion proof. And I just thought, I was amazed by that, and I thought, oh my God, like what else, what else is going on in the food industry that I don't know? I mean, and it's interesting because if you go into the supermarket, you actually will see on bottles of vegetable oil, which is predominantly soybean oil, it'll say 100% natural. And if people had any idea how these things were made, I mean, 100% natural is a far cry from the truth of how these things are made. There's nothing 100% natural about it, in addition to the fact that it's also coming from GMO seeds, which are not, those should not be called natural either. So, so anyway, I really wanted to go to see some of these plants. There's about, it's a very consolidated industry. There's about 3 companies that do it. So I talked to all of them. One of them shut me down right away, and then the others seemed to think, that, oh, that's great. You can come see the process. And I was going back and forth with the PR person, trying to set up a time for me to go visit. I think it was in Illinois, which is where the whole soybean industry started, Decatur, Illinois. And then he just stopped responding. He just kind of disappeared and wouldn't return my phone calls and wouldn't return my emails. So as a result, I never got into to see those production facilities either, which was very, very disappointing. But I can understand why they wouldn't want to let a journalist in there. It's not going to look good for them. So it doesn't look good for them anyway. But yeah. Yeah, no, I have to tell them, yeah. I mean, sometimes when I call 800 numbers to find out stuff, I'll just call as a regular person and see if they'll tell me. Like, one of the things that is particularly vexing is a lot of the chain restaurants that are not the fast food restaurants like Applebee's and Cheesecake Factory, they don't list their ingredients. And I'm fairly sure that it's just an additive-laden amalgamation of reheated products at those restaurants, but they won't publish their ingredients. So sometimes I'll call up and try and see if I can get them to tell me something, and then I won't say that I'm a journalist. But certainly, yeah, for anything like that where I'm dealing with these big companies directly in their PR, yeah, you have to, yeah.
So if you buy olive oil organic at Costco or Sam's Club, and they're charging you a bit more than regular olive oil, are you really getting olive oil, or are you getting oil with hexane, or how do we know what we're getting?
Right, so if it's cold, olive oil is not, there's no hexane with olive oil, no. So the reason that you need hexane is because, I mean, if you think about a soybean or a canola bean, I mean, these are like hard, dense things. Like if you were in your kitchen trying to make soybean oil, like you'd be there all day, like you'd get like a drop, you'd get like a little secretion of it. It's very difficult to get the oil out of these things. They're not naturally designed to produce oil. But so you need something really heavy and industrial to get it out. I mean, hexane gets almost all the oil out, like 99% of it. There's another technology, if you look on labels, some of the natural foods that use vegetable oils, they say expeller pressed. And that's where they're not using hexane, they're using a mechanical process, like big giant machines where they're crushing it. And that gets out about 70% of the oil. So cold pressed, which you can do for olives, you could do that in your kitchen. You could take a bunch of olives and get a press, and so they're basically just pressing it mechanically without any heat. Yeah. Or chemicals, correct, yeah. Because olives naturally lend themselves to oil. I mean, they're very it's easy to get the oil out. Yeah. So you would never need to use chemicals for that, nor would you want to.
Hi again. I feel sick. Over the years,
Sorry about
between the chickens and the things we shouldn't eat, now I've gone 8 days without any animal products and sugar, and I do feel much better.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. Okay, so now I just looked up Monsanto, and I didn't know, but they're with Scots, and they're in agreement. And now we're not supposed to use Miracle Grow, which I always thought was the next best thing to apple pie. So now it says, under the agreement, Scots will pay Monsanto a one-time upfront payment of $300 million in exchange for a Roundup brand license, extended agency agreement, and technology agreement. And they say they look forward to continued partnership with Scots as they work to deliver consumers with a diverse range of lawn and garden solutions.
Right.
So I think I'm going to go home, and I live in a zero lot line house. I'm going to get rid of my lawn, but I haven't figured out what I'm going to do. My neighbors are probably going to all be really upset, but I'm going to do that.
You should check. It depends on where you live, but sometimes there are lawn services that will come and do organic weed treatment. They'll come and treat your lawn for you. Sometimes you can buy it. It's a little hard to find in stores, though. I found certainly Home Depot doesn't carry it. But I would check to see if there's any sort of natural lawn solutions in your area.
Thank you for this talk. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Well, thank you so much. It's been really a pleasure to be here, and I've enjoyed it. Thank you so much.